I debated on whether I wanted to do a restriction list discussion video, mainly because you're going to see a lot of it this week and next. And although I'm partly adding to the oversaturation of the same type of content, I do want to deviate a little and discuss not just the potential restrictions, but the possibility of unrestrictions as well. The narrative of this video is going to utilize the top 32 list from the Grand Asia Open Tournament, and based on this data, speculate which decks will get potential hits, what is more likely to be a deck that is hit, choice restrictions, unrestrictions, and potential effects on the market. Disclaimer, I am not making the claim that all these cards deserve to be limited, banned, or whatever. Some are more objective opinions that probably should happen due to the health of game design. But enough talk, let's get down to it. Bandai's Grand Asia Open event concluded last week, and there was a lot to learn from the top 32 deck lists. Out of the top 32 decks, 9 Numemon decks took a little over 25% of the slots. And despite the high representation, none of these decks were in the top 4. Miragegaogamon was represented by 5 decks. Yellow Vaccine and Blue Magnamon 3 decks each, 3 Doragoromons, 2 Fenrileucomons, 2 Purple Hybrids, and then 1 each of Lightfang Nightclaw, Yellow Magnamon, Ancient Garurumon, Ancient Greymon, and Shine Greymon. Of all the decks that were available on Twitter, the top 4 decks were Lightfang Nightclaw, Miragegaogamon, Doragoromon, and Yellow Vaccine Magnamon X. Briefly, I want to emphasize that the upcoming restriction list is going to be based on Japan's results, not necessarily what's going on in the English meta. While there is an argument that Numemon wasn't even represented in the top 4, you have to keep in mind that because Japan's format is best of 1, if you're playing high roll decks, it's easier to high roll once and win one time than it is to high roll and win another game, especially once the secret sauce is revealed. Because of this, Numemon has one of the highest consistencies when it comes to playing it and winning with it. There are only a handful of matchups that this deck loses to, and because of this, even though it didn't top, its representation in the top 32 will likely be enough to hit cards for this deck. And there's a lot of cards that could be hit in this deck. Promo Ukkomon, BT16 Ukkomon, Numemon X, Munzemon X, Platinum Numemon, or even Luawada. A lot of players want Ukkomon gone, Promo and BT16. The thing is, I see it more likely that only one Ukkomon will be hit from rotation while the other is allowed to be at 4 copies a little longer. Free raising and memory is just too strong, but BT16 in my mind feels a little too soon to hit just based on the release window we've seen for it. But I honestly wouldn't be upset either if both went to 1. That being said, I playtested the crap out of Numemon without Ukkomon at 4 and even at 1. The deck was still doing pretty well, considering you have starter deck Agumon that could be used. Numemon X is another card that I could see being hit to 1 as well. After all, it joins the ranks of over-the-top powerful X antibody level 4s like Greymon X and Garurumon X. I tried playtesting this at 1 as well, and it still came up kind of often. Even if your Numemon X is sent to the trash, you have ways to recur this Digimon, like through Munzemon. But one thing players hate about the deck as well is Munzemon X. Because the DP reduction does go through your opponent's turn, this makes it an ideal target for Valkyriemon Ace. I'm not saying this is the go-to either, but the Etemon Valkyriemon Ace play is still nasty. Some players in discussions felt Platinum Numemon would be an excellent choice as this removes the top end and memory gain. And lastly, Luawada, this tamer can be seen in a lot of decks as well, in particular the Gabubon and Agubon kind of decks as those tamers from BT6 are not a once per turn when you promote. The only thing is, these decks aren't viable for us here in English until December. So bottom line, what do I think are the likely culprits for the upcoming restriction list? Promo Ukkomon and Numemon X in my mind have the highest chance of being limited to 1. I think BT16 Ukkomon, while powerful, is less likely to get limited because it hasn't been out as long. And while Munzemon and Platinum Numemon would be great hits to the deck as well, I feel like Ukkomon and Numemon X removes a lot of the floating aspect and requires more on-play shenanigans. As for Luawada, I want to make Agubon work. Miragegaogamon is another deck that a lot of players still see to this day, but arguably one amazing element about this deck is the fact that it can OTK relatively easily in 1 turn. In the Numemon matchup, it's typically a toss-up on the match because I've seen both decks win. I mulled over the deck list for the Grand Asia Open event, and even if you restricted Thomas Norstein, either copy, to 1, The problem is some decks already run just one. Ukkomon was already a good hit, even if it also hit generic decks as well. But then you have so many Digimon that have jamming as an inheritable. So the bottom line, what's the best take? There was only one card that I felt could be hit, but it regrettably also really stinks. BT11 Miragegaogamon is just so good, and even generic enough to be used in any blue deck. But doing so feels like you completely nerfed this deck into the ground, that is until there is at least a new copy of the card. One reasoning why I could see Bandai hitting Miragegaogamon is likely the same reasoning they gave when BT6 Savior Hackmon was hit to 1. And that's the, oh, this deck has been in the meta longer than we'd like, so we're going to do away with it for now. While Thomas could be a potential hit, based on how it was played in the event, I think it could manage and still do fine. Magnamon X is the last major contender that I'd like to go over because this deck is also going to largely be targeted with all of its abilities to be immune. Whether you go yellow base or blue base, the common card between the two is the Awakening of the Golden Knight. This card could see a restriction to 1, mainly because I sincerely doubt that Magnamon X would be the actual target. Awakening lets you reclaim Magnamon or Magnamon X's, and even climb up from a simple armored Digimon. Not to mention, providing DP protection. But to subdivide this discussion, other elements on the yellow end could be BT14 TK Takashi, because the Tamer is busted and works with itself. Putting this to 1 would be fine even for regular yellow vaccine decks, because you have so many yellow Tamers with TK Takashi in its name. I do however think that Patamon is a little much if they were to limit this card to 1. But on the flip side, Emissary of Hope to 1 would be something I'd like to see mainly because of its similarities to Hidden Potential Discovered. Will this card be touched? On one hand, if you hit TK to 1, this card could probably stay. But if you're not hitting TK, I'd like this card to 1. In regards to the blue side of things with Magnamon, there's not really too much to hit. I think the only card that I find mildly offensive is the starter deck Magnamon because it does so much whether it's in the hand, security, or even trash. In the trash, it adds buffs for BT8 Magnamon and can be reclaimed with Awakening. In security, it could de-Digivolve, and if you have a level 3, it offers you potential spot removal. And while these are the 3 main decks that have taken the most time in regards to discussion, I already see some players talking about restricting cards in Ancient Garurumon, Ancient Greymon, despite the format having only just started for this set. One miscellaneous card I thought would be hilarious to hit to 1 was also Hammerspark, but that's mainly because I see a lot of decks utilizing Hammerspark in the upcoming format, and it falls into the same category of, but this card has been used longer than anticipated in the meta and should go away. While you could argue other memory gainers like Gravity Crush and Blinding Ray are also silly for Red Hybrid and Magnamon X decks, ultimately these don't have security effects, which is why I have less animosity towards them. While I've talked a lot about restrictions, are there currently any bans I'd like to see? I am still in agreement with a lot of players in that Hidden Potential Discovered is probably one of the sackiest cards in the Digimon card game. In many ways, I feel like this card is the primary cause of why green feels so underwhelming 90% of the time. It just severely limits design for the color, and with it gone, I want to know if green would be even better. So now the next question, do I think there should be any pair restrictions? Largely, the biggest card in question is going to be EX7 Shoto Kazuma with Mother D Reaper. But I'd like to extend EX7 Shoto beyond just D Reaper and also include Gate of the Deadly Sins. While Mother D Reaper is an uninteractable blocker with 15,000 DP, the other issue stems from the fact that Demon Lords can now pump out any Demon Lord and treat it as a blocker. Because this list is going to target Japan, more than likely Shoto may be choice restricted. But from the English side of things, we haven't even had it released yet, which is why I foresee Japan not touching this combo yet. A few interesting ideas for other pair restrictions would be promo Ukkomon with BT16 Ukkomon, or some combination that prevents the Ukkomons from working with Lua Wada. One pitch I had with the judge friend was the concept of being only able to run Ukkomons in a deck as long as you ran big Ukkomon in the deck. However, my friend smacked that down very quickly, mainly because it restricts deck building. My other reasoning for this line of thought was that because of BT7 Doru Greymon, while it did slow down Alphamon, the question ultimately became, who suffered? Alphamon or Dorugoromon? Likewise, if you limit either Ukkomon or Lua Wadas, this kills the potential of big Ukkomon decks. But the follow-up question, since when has Bandai ever cared about bottom tier decks? Ultimately, I feel choice restrictions should only occur if there's a potential for an infinite loop. In particular, the case of Galaxy Loop and, if at all possible, a future in which Waru Seedramon and Dimension Scissor is more consistent. But now the talk for this video is, will there be unrestrictions? A lot of purple cards will likely stay on the restriction list because they are too generic, although I do think it would be hilarious if Icemon Scatter Mode came back to 4 in combination with the new Liberator Impmon cards. But real talk, in discussions with one of my closest friends in the Digimon Card Game, he made a valid point in that Digimon like Dorugreymon, Permaware Garurumon, Greymon X, and Shoutmon Cross 4 may potentially come off the restriction list. With Dorugreymon, this Digimon might have immunity, but there's so many Blast Digivolution Digimon that could intercept it for the turn. While true it's protected from deletion and DP reducing effects, Bounce and De-Digivolve is so much more prevalent now. The same applies to Permaware Garurumon and Greymon X in that these decks are much too slow. And if you're greedy, especially with any of these Digimon, you could end up losing your entire stack. One reason why I think Greymon X coming back to 4 would be interesting is that we are quickly approaching a hybrid format again when heavy with Tamers. Well, not just hybrids, because future releases are looking at Digicrossing again. And what better way to bring back Cross 4 in the already extremely fast format? But ultimately, I could see Bandai not bringing any restricted card off the list, although I think it would definitely help out some of the older decks that are still struggling. Which leads to the final point of this video, the market repercussions. I don't do market analysis much for the Digimon Card Game, mainly because the market is just too volatile when it comes to predictions and whatnot. The most I'll talk about at this time is that the Digimon market will likely be frozen for the next 2 weeks. Some players speculating on what to buy out and what to dump. But should some of the restrictions, whether they be limit to 1, choice, or even unrestricted, it's going to cause immediate changes to the market. But again, this is based on the fact that there will be any substantial changes. In total for this video, I discussed over 15 card changes for the Digimon Card Game. Keep in mind, there are well over 2,500 cards in the card game at this point. And even then, the most Bandai has ever changed on one list was the last restriction list that had 5 cards being moved to restricted and 1 choice restriction. While many players are hoping for multiple hits, I can't help but have butterflies in my stomach right now with the uncertainty that Bandai could very well hit 5 to 8 cards, or in the end, just hit 1 to 2. Which cards do you agree with for this prediction, and do you think that with some of these restrictions, the Digimon Card Game will once again thrive on deck creativity? Let me know your thoughts, because as always, this was a fun video to explore. This is DIGI-PANDA, logging out.